Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Who's been your favorite leader and why?
That has changed. I've thought a lot about this because I draw inspiration from those who have gone before me, both leaders I have met and leaders I have just read about and admired from ancient history to the present. But honestly, watching what President Zelensky has been able to achieve in Ukraine, rallying his country, overwhelmed by this onslaught from Russia, rallying them to the defense of not just their freedom and their territorial integrity, but I think most of us recognize the future of the liberal democratic order, of freedom itself. They are holding the line and fighting the fight for the rest of us. And I think history will be the final judge, but it's probably not too soon to say that a lot of it has depended on a single individual holding his ground and saying, no, I'm not leaving. This is my country, and I'm going to lead the fight for it.
Yeah. Ken, I agree with you. I think it's fantastic what he's done and how he's held it. And I actually was quite interested in the actual comment he made back to President Biden about the fact that, hey, I don't need a lift. I need ammunition. I need help here. Yeah.
Right.
It was interesting. Tell me, if you were to have a coffee with President Zelensky on a park bench sometime later on, what would be one question you want to ask him?
It would have to be later on because I wouldn't want to waste his time right now. And it certainly wouldn't be out in the open. Gosh, I would probably just reflexively ask him about his family. I know he has so much wisdom to share about leadership, but the thing I kept thinking about was the conversation he had to have with his wife about staying and how that went, because she stayed too. The whole family stayed. The kids stayed. And I've been in dangerous situations before, but I've never in those dangerous situations had to account for the safety of my family as well. That takes a level of moral courage that I think very few leaders, especially military leaders, have ever had to grapple with, because their wars are almost always fought at a certain remove from their loved ones.
Yeah, imagine his focus as well. He's out there talking about things and working through things, but then he's also got in the back of his mind probably his family just there to the left or right, wherever they are. Yeah, that must be quite difficult for him to focus. But
yeah, I cannot imagine. I just can't imagine. And I've imagined plenty of leadership scenarios, including those in which lives are on the line, but never the life of my own wife and kids.
Yeah, and I did an episode on this actually recently. I do a freestyle episode once a week as well, and I talked about him, and I actually talked about how a lot of the Western leaders he went from actor to being a president, and they laughed at him and thought, and now he's showing them who he really is and what kind of leader he is. And I think that he's changing some opinions big time.
I think he's changing opinions that people have of him. I think he's changing people's understandings, leaders' understandings of their own approach to leadership. He's certainly changed the way Ukraine feels about itself as a country and about him as a leader. For the Burn the Boats podcast, I've talked to a number of people inside Ukraine, including a member of the Territorial Defense Forces, who I should probably put on the list of leaders I admire, because this is a gentleman who, the day before the war started, was at his computer wearing a suit and tie as a financial analyst, and within 3 days was manning a checkpoint with an AR-15 and body armor. And he confided to me and all of my listeners, but he confided in a confessional moment that before the war, he had a relatively low opinion of President Zelensky, as did many Ukrainians. But the glare of that kind of spotlight and the pressure of that kind of conflict, and we'll call it a war, even if Putin will not, and war itself tests people's true character, and
Mm.
Zelensky's has shown through.
Yep, absolutely. That character being tested is massive. But also, I think the other one would be around actions, a lot stronger than just words. And the guy's gone and done something and showing people. So I admire him for that. Now, Ken, the show is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that title or that statement, what does that mean for you?
I'd probably put the question back to you because I assume that's an acknowledgement that in the business world, leadership has had to adapt dramatically to different expectations among employers, among clients, among customers. I think in the military world, the fundamentals are still the same. I
Mm.
really believe that. So I don't think leadership has changed that fundamentally in certain contexts. But having led in military contexts, I am absolutely sympathetic to this idea more than an idea, the reality that leaders have had to grow with the times. And we have to understand that our employees have much different expectations in the 2020s than they did a generation ago.
What kind of expectations do you think they've got now that are different from a while ago?
Part of it is market driven. It is an employee's marketplace.
Mm.
And if you're not aware of that, you're going to have a tough time finding good employees. But I also think that work life balance has become a real priority for my daughter's generation, let's say. And if you're not sensitive to that, I don't think you're going to get the most out of your employees. It's not just a clock punching generation. They want meaning in the work, they want meaning out of their non work hours. And I think good leaders recognize that and can foster it.
Mm. And in the military sense, no, it's just the same foundation. When I say same, it's the strong foundation that they have. Military people expecting anything different from their leaders today? Or is it
Say
just the
that
same?
again. What's the
So from a military perspective, people who were in the military looking at their leaders differently and expecting things from their leaders differently as well.
on the margins? Sure. I think there has to be some acknowledgement that the generational shift also affects those who join the military.
Right.
But the mission is just so paramount in the military. The mission drives and defines everything. And maybe if there is an adaptation to the current leadership context, it's perhaps as a military leader talking about the mission in a way that is motivational to one's subordinates and not just taking it for granted, but making sure that there is that belief in the mission and using that to motivate.
Antonio, now this person could be alive or from history. I presume you're gonna choose a Greek leader. I'm pretty sure you will. Or maybe you'll choose a Spanish one. But
Yeah,
the question I've got for you is, who's your favorite leader and why?
I will not talk about a leader in business. One of my persons that has touched me most is one of the most, probably the world expert in executive coaching called Marshall Goldsmith. I had the pleasure to meet him in some awards events, Thinkers 50. And what this Marshall did a few years ago, he said, I've been very successful. I've been coaching the most important CEOs around the world. I want to give away for free all what I've learned to 100 people. And I thought, wow, this guy, it's amazing. I was lucky to be part of one of these 100 people, and the generosity of sharing what you've learned and what you've achieved to other people. I've done come across very often. I thought, wow, this is usually these people tend to be very ego centered and selfish, and they want more and more. And I found this person, Marshall, who was willing to share and say, this is, I think, modern leadership where you give away what you know, mostly freely. He introduced me to other amazing leaders like Alan Mulally, who was the former CEO of Boeing and moved into Ford, CEO of Ford. And I had the pleasure to discuss about leadership with Alan Mulally. So this type of two people, I would say, have become friends and great influencers and great examples of leadership. It happens to know Alan Mulally was one of the best project sponsors I've ever met. He used that when he was developing airplanes in Boeing, and he did that with Ford too. So it became also a connection personally on my topic. Okay, if you want to be a successful CEO, then look into Alan Mulally. He really understood projects and how to implement that in two major organizations. So this would be my top two picks today, Dennis. Sorry, it's not Greek or Spanish.
Oh, never mind. I'm sure they know some Greek, so that's all good. Now, Antonio, what's quite interesting you're saying there is about these two individuals. So for me, the question that just came up for me then is the importance of hanging around or being around successful people. For leaders who want to become CEOs, or they're in a C-suite role, or they're in a senior leader role right now, they want to become a C-suite, or they want to be on a board, or even people who want to become a frontline leader, right? What should they do? Should around successful people? Should they hang around them? What's some things you think that they should be doing?
Absolutely, that is. I think it's important nowadays. It's quite easy to follow influential people and even get in touch with them and say, listen, if you don't mind, you spare a few minutes. I'm looking for some advice. I appreciate what you're doing. So I think you need to be careful because the pros of this accessibility becomes a con in terms of they get too many requests, right? And I'm sure you get that, Dennis. I get a lot. And you try to keep polite, but just when you find the right approach to you, then you say, okay, I'm going to spend time with this person. I think I can add somebody, but if they're demanding, the approach is not, then you try to ignore them. But definitely, I think trying to get into these networks where people are generous, who are willing to share. I'm against commercializing everything, right? And having different type of subscription, the golden, the platinum, and that you need to find the right leaders where you can get access to them. I think that's part of leadership, right? Is being accessible and helping other people. So definitely don't be shy. Just careful or thoughtful on how you approach these people for some advice. But if you do it, I think you can really get a lot of this approach for becoming a better leader. Definitely.
Yeah, and I like what you said there in relation to the fact that you can approach them, but also being around people and giving things. I don't mind giving my time to people and helping people and giving things to them, maybe information, things like that, my knowledge, experience, as long as they go and do something with it. If you're going to
Yeah,
come to me and you want to suck my brain, as they call it, or I want to just to pick your brain, I'm like, yeah, but what are you going to do with this here? It's really important that you're going to do something with it going forward. And I think that's important to think about. Now,
exactly.
Antonio, you mentioned before in relation to a little bit about leadership is changing. And that's, of course, the title of the show that we're on, the episode, this podcast. When I mentioned that title or that statement, leadership is changing, what does that mean for you?
It just resonated so much because I'm thinking the future of work or the workplace or how we see organization, I believe it's changing dramatically. We've never seen the change that we've seen. And I'm not talking about working through Zoom or hybrid or virtual. My research and my publication in HVR, the book or the article about the project economy says that for the past century, most of the focus and the leadership and the structure and the culture and the hierarchies has been focused on operational activities, right? 80, 90%. That's management attention, leadership attention. Priorities has always been operational activities, the extensive, the marketing, the finance, the operations, the quality, the sales. But with the increase of speed and the increase of change and plus adding to the mix the automation, heavy robotization, AI, operations shrinks. And what is that now? Most of the people, like in banking or finance, you see them working in project based teams and agile teams. And to that point, is that we just discussed that this leadership is different in a changing world where people don't report, people want freedom, people want to be self managed, but they want to be inspired too. They want to have the resources. They want to have senior leaders support when they need that, not when you want it. So it's a very different ballgame. And I'm afraid that leaders are not prepared. I think one of the major issues why so many projects fail, and we're talking about 60 to 70% of project failure. Imagine if you invest 1 billion in projects every year, 700 million are just wasted. It's from senior executives. because they don't know their role. They don't know how to prioritize. They have not adapted the structure of their organization, the culture to be more agile. They don't know how to sponsor projects. So I think it's just a very different type of leaders that we need to succeed in what I call the project economy, which is, most of the work is carried out through projects now. And it's a different game, and you need to really change the type of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you say there in relation to leaders are not prepared enough. I don't think they are. I think they're struggling. They're working some long hours and things like that because they're not sure how to handle things. Leaders who are handling it well, you can see how they are doing it. And whatever's being thrown at them, they're able to adapt, to pivot, to be flexible, do all those kind of things, which is really interesting.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.